Hi guys, I'm Heather, and I'm super excited that you've decided to join me today for my presentation that's all about world building for memoir readers. And the whole point of this is so I can help you understand how to world build effectively in your memoir so that you really can connect to readers. As I said, my name's Heather, and I've been helping writers write their novels for over 10 years. I'm also an award-winning author accelerator book coach, a developmental editor, a podcaster, and the founder of the World Shift Summit. So I wear all kinds of different hats. And speaking of podcasts, I just want to do a shameless little plug for my podcast because I really think it's helpful to a lot of writers, whether or not they're speculative fiction writers. So if you're interested in checking it out to get basic writing advice, which would be super applicable for memoir writers, go ahead and use your camera to scan the QR code and just kind of put that in your back pocket so you can watch it later on and then come back here. I don't want to lose you that quickly. So what do? Well, I help writers like yourself engage readers, enthrall agents, and change the world one novel or memoir at a time. And I say it like that because I truly believe in the power of words. I think that memoirs do have the power to change the world. Sometimes they're going to change lots of people. Millions of people might read a memoir. Other times it's only a few thousand or a handful of people whose life it changes. But that is still power. All right, so let's talk about what you'll learn today. So today you're going to learn several things. First, you'll learn what world building really means to memoir writers and why it matters every bit as much as it does in fiction. You'll also learn the 3 major world building areas that you need to address in your memoir. And you'll learn 3 important secrets to make world building irresistible. Again, so that you really can connect to readers. Before we dive in, I just want to let you know that you need to grab the workbook. And you need to grab it because we are actually going to be using it to do some exercises in this presentation. So you want to do it now so that it will have time to show up in your inbox, okay? Because it always takes a few minutes to do that. So again, all you have to do is take out your camera, point your camera right at this QR code, and that will give you a button to click on your screen where you can go sign up for it to be on my email list, and I'll send you the workbook. Okay, so let's go ahead and dive in. So what is world building anyway? Well, if you ask Merriam-Webster, then world building is the creation of a fictional world, especially within the science fiction and fantasy genres, that is believable and consistent within the context of the story. Okay, well, that's a pretty good definition, but it's also insufficient. Because if you don't write science fiction or fantasy, it leaves you thinking that you actually don't have any world building to do. And that is an egregious error. So I've decided to create my own definition of what world building is that I think will help us all to understand and see how it can be applicable to our own work. To me, world building is the process of helping readers understand your story world in all its nuance and color. It means not reducing the world to cliches or caricatures or broad, boring assumptions. It means not assuming that the reader already gets the time or place or contextual truth that is at the core of your memoir experience. And finally, it means recognizing that even familiar settings, like your past home, your city, your social class, your family routines, have specifics that readers don't know and can't possibly understand without your help. And in fact, it really hit home to me the other day when I was watching a TikTok by a creator that I really love. His name is The Speech Prof, and I just really love this. So I'm going to show it to you because I think it's so super applicable to what we do as memoir writers.
So my wife and I have very different backgrounds. Right? We share the same values, right? We all the important things we have in common, but in general, we had very different life experiences. And oftentimes I will just do or see something that is very clearly a brand new experience for her. And we end up playing a little game. Is this a Latino thing? Is it a poverty thing? Is it a neurodivergent thing? Or is it just something weird that I do? Because I'm kind of a weird guy.
Okay, so I think you've seen enough to understand what I'm talking about. So even when two people are married, there are these misunderstandings. There are these, wait, what was that all about? And he has to go through who he is as a person. And we'll talk about this later. He has to go through his identities and say, where does this quirky behavior or this thing that I'm doing, where does it come from? Um, and I think we all have to do that. We all have to just really backtrack and say, wait, the experiences that I have, the understandings of the world that I have are actually unique to me. And if I want my readers to understand, then I have to go through and make sure that I've explained everything well enough through my own perspective, right? So I really love that. And hopefully that will help you kind of have an idea of what I'm talking about as we go through this presentation. All right. So what does this what does this idea mean about world building for memoir writers? Well, it means that we must world build with just as much intention and enthusiasm, I might add, as any speculative fiction writer. It's just that instead of creating a world, right, we actually have to reconstruct a story world that lives in our memory. And we have to capture what it really meant to be alive in that space. So, memoir writers will always ask me at this point, what world building areas should I focus on? Where do I need to put my attention? There are actually 3 areas that we need to focus on, and I'll introduce them now and then we'll go through them one by one. First, you need to understand the point or message of your memoir. Number 2, you need to understand the broader, objective reality of the story world that you're creating. And number 3, you need to understand the personal, subjective reality of the story world. Let's start with the point or the message. So what's your point? There's this wonderful little meme that I have here of Homer and Bart, and Bart says, "What's the point of this story?" And Homer says, "I like stories." So the only point of his story was that he likes stories. However, you don't get that luxury. You actually have to have a point. A point is the takeaway message of your work. It's the thing that you learned by experiencing the events of the memoir. It's the thing that you are hoping readers will walk away from your memoir understanding about themselves or about the world. A point is typically just a cliche statement. It's very often cliched. And the reason why it's cliche is because it's a universal statement. It's like a universal truth that almost anyone can relate to. It's big and it's broad. And it can be expressed in a single sentence. And the reason why I have this picture of a key here is because I truly believe that is the key to your story, your memoir. It is the unifying statement. It's the guiding statement that helps you decide what ideas and what scenes really belong in this work. It's the statement that helps you look back over your entire past and say, I'm going to cherry pick the parts of my life that help me make this point, that help me argue this message to my readers so that they will really understand. Because memoir isn't a biography. It's not where you just list everything that ever happened to you from birth till now. Absolutely not. You are literally going to be looking back over your life and just picking out moments that all together pile up to create this beautiful point that you're going to have. In order to kind of understand a point, I think that we actually need to look at a couple points. I have picked 2 memoirs that are quite famous that we can look at. So the first one is Wild Game. And the point of this novel, like if you took the entire novel and you just distilled it down to one lesson that has been learned, one message, it might be something like this. Living under the weight of a parent's secret can shatter your sense of self, and only honesty can set you free. So that kind of sounds like a message that might be on a poster, right? So it's big, it's broad, it's universal. But if I took every scene and every moment of Wild Game, it all sort of leads up to this big understanding. Let's do another one. Educated by Tara Westover. If I took this novel and I boiled it down to a big, broad, almost cliche-sounding one-sentence statement, It would be that education can become a path to freedom, self-discovery, and breaking cycles of abuse. So again, a big, broad statement. And yet, that's what readers are supposed to learn from it, right? And it was powerful and people loved it. So what I'm arguing here is that having a point doesn't mean that you're being pedantic. It doesn't mean you're going to beat the reader over the head with it. It means that you are going to have this beautiful guiding statement that helps you decide what stays and what goes. And it also helps you build the world because it tells you what to focus on. So if you haven't grabbed the workbook already, pull out your phone, follow the QR code, and get the workbook. We're going to do world building exercise number 1. Open up that workbook and just take 30 seconds. I'm going to time them. You don't have to. 30 seconds to jot down the point of your novel. Now, you don't have to worry about this being the end all be all, the most perfectly written point that has ever been written. No, I'm giving you 30 seconds to do it. This is just like the first thing that pops into your head, like the first sentence that might be something close to what you're trying to say. You can iterate on this later. You can come back, you can workshop it, you can edit it, you can make it more and more perfect. Right now, just get something down. All right, I'm going to give you those 30 seconds. All right, my friends, I know that seemed like a very short amount of time, but hopefully it did give you enough time to just get the very first iteration. Okay, let's keep going. So the first thing I said to understand world building is to understand your point. You have to know that. The second one is we're going to start talking about some broad objective realities of your memoir world because you will have to understand some big truths, some things that are, again, objective and a broader reality of the time and space where you were living out your memoir. All right, so the first broader objective reality will be literally time and place. So what was the year, the decade, the country, the state, the city, the neighborhood, the street? Was it rural? Was it urban? Was it suburban? Was it coastal? Was it inland? So all of these things will absolutely have some kind of an effect on what was happening in the world. And these are things that may or may not be shared by your readers. So you'll have to explain them as they become important. If we look over here at this picture, this is Bourbon Street, New Orleans, Louisiana. So this is a time, a place, a country, a state, a city, all of these things. And if you think this is going to be such a memorable place to be, and it would be so different than, say, New York at the same time period. So don't neglect it. Don't think, well, everyone understands what it would be like to be on Bourbon Street in New Orleans, Louisiana in whatever year this is. Trust me, they wouldn't. I think this is the 60s. But trust me, they wouldn't understand that. So you have to help them understand that. You would also need to world build around political and social realities of the time, things that you might think everyone knows or understands, but I promise you, they don't. Even if they were to pick up a newspaper or a magazine from the time, it's not going to be as realistic as what you can build from memory, right? Because you're building it in a personal way instead of a detached way. So things like, what were the laws and policies and government actions, wars, protests, elections, major news events? Were there any social movements happening at the time that impacted your story? Again, some of the things that I go over right now really might not impact your story at all, but I want to make sure that you are at least considering these larger, broader realities and asking yourself the question, did these relate to my story? Did they relate in a way that I might not have thought about at the time because it just seemed so normal? Okay, power structures. What were the community expectations like? What were the pecking orders and the school systems? Was there a religious authority that had a great effect? How about local leaders or law enforcement? Government influence, propaganda. Oh my gosh, propaganda has such a big impact on us all throughout the ages? What was the propaganda of your time, and did it influence your story at all? And then, of course, one that I think is really big, who had the power and who didn't? If you look back over the last, 4, 5, 6, 7 decades, who had the power and who didn't changes dramatically. And also, this happens regionally. So maybe who had the power in New York might be quite a bit different than who had the power in the rural South. Okay, so always consider these things, because remember, you're asking yourself, oh, wait, someone else doesn't understand this. We also want to consider pop culture, things like music, athletes, games, fashion trends, technology, shared catchphrases, and jingles. These are all things, and we'll talk a little bit later how we want to include specific details. So these are wonderful things. From all of this broader context, you can start implanting into your memoir to make it super memorable. And finally, cultural norms. What was considered polite or rude? What were the gender roles and expectations? Were the parenting styles different? How about dating and marriage, the workplace? What behaviors were celebrated versus those that were stigmatized? These are all important things that will help make your memoir textured and rich, full of the detail that we want, and it will help readers connect because they'll feel like they're living in that other place through your eyes, and it will really help them want to stay immersed in your world. All right, let's do world building exercise number 2. I would like you to take 1 minute to jot down 5 major objective realities. You can go right to your workbook and find this, that shaped your life during the period that your memoir takes place. So just 5 major realities, objective realities that you think had probably the most effect. All right, I'm going to go ahead and start the timer, and you can start writing. All right, stop writing. Again, you can come back to this later. I know I have to go super fast because this presentation does have a time limit, but I definitely encourage you to come back and fill things out later when you have a little bit more time. All right, so let's talk about the third area that you need to think about. This is the personal subjective reality of your memoir world. So there's all that objective stuff that we could read in newspapers and magazines, but then there's the personal stuff. And let's think about what I mean by that. The first personal thing that I'm talking about is your identities. Notice that I didn't say your identity, because you actually have many identities, and how they intersect determines how you move through the world. More importantly, how they intersect actually determines what world that you are moving through. And I guarantee you that most of your readers will not share all of your identities. So even if they grew up in the same town as you, they're not going to understand your world unless you fully explain it to them. For example, if 2 writers are penning a memoir about being a musician in the 1960s in Alabama, the worlds that they inhabit would be very different depending on the identities of the writers. For instance, a cisgender white heterosexual man, like one of the Allman Brothers up here, would live in a very different world than would a transgender Black gay woman like Jackie Shane. So they might have existed in the exact same location, in the same city, on the same street, but lived in very different worlds. And there is no way that your reader would understand your specific world that is born out of the intersection of your identities and how you move through the world without you explaining it to them. So what are some questions that you need to ask yourself in order to understand all the identities that might affect you? Well, there are too many questions for me to possibly ask them all, but I'll get you started here on some things to think about when we're thinking about what identities we really have. What is your gender? How about your ethnicity? We all know that some ethnicities get privileges while others don't. How about, are you a part of the LGBTQIA community? That is an identity that certainly impacts how you move through the world. What is your age? What is your religion? Are you neurospicy? And what I mean by this is, do you have something like autism, or do you have ADHD? Do you have OCD? Any of these types of things. Are you disabled in some way, whether it's visible or invisible? Are you an immigrant? What is your socioeconomic status? Are you a parent, child, sibling, or caregiver? Do you have an addiction? What is your level of education or schooling experience? Did you go to private school or public school? Were you homeschooled? Are you a first-generation college student? What subcultures do you belong to? Musician, athlete, military, artist, gamer? What is your profession? So when you start thinking about, what are the things that my readers just would not understand because they don't have these same identities? That means I really need to world build those things very carefully for them so they get it. I cannot just assume that they understand. I promise you they don't. All right. So that means, of course, we're going to do another exercise. This one is called Who I Am. Again, we're going to do these rapid fire. We have to, but you can come back later and iterate on them. So step 1, take 1 minute to write down all the identities that you hold. And then you're going to circle 5 identities that you feel have impacted your life the most, particularly during the period your memoir took place. All right, I'm going to give you 1 minute to do this. Okay, that's been 1 minute. I know it felt super short. Again, you can iterate on it later. But I hope this helps you to see that your identities have a huge impact on your world, because another writer would be circling 5 different identities that would be impacting them and would be helping to create the world in which they moved through. So we're still talking about personal subjective reality. Here's point number 2, your interior world. So what is your interior world? Well, it grows out of the intersection of your identities. It's also called interiority. You'll hear it called this all the time if you listen to podcasts, especially mine. And it just means literally your inner world, like what's going on inside your head, your memories, your beliefs, your fears, your hopes, your thoughts, your feelings, your emotionality, your worldview, your emotional wounds, your psyche. It's being inside your head. And literally, this is what readers are there for. They aren't there to just get the external facts. They would just be reading non-memoir nonfiction, right? They wouldn't be coming to someone's personal experience. The reason why they come to your personal experience is because they want your opinion on it. They want to dig down deep into your brain and be like your best friend who gets all of the inner monologue. They want it all. So in order to build your story world effectively, you must understand, embrace, and enthusiastically include on the page how your interior world shaped your perception of the external world. That just means As you're moving along through your memoir and stuff is happening to you, how did it affect you? What were you thinking and feeling each time something happened? Don't leave that off the page because that is what people are there for. We're going to talk a little bit more about that later. At the same time, though, you have to include how the external world shaped your interior world. Like when something happened, how did it make you change your mind or think something different or think something new? Or what did it make you question? So here's something to think about. It is this interior world, the youiest you, that grows out of the intersection of your identities. And that is what readers come for, period. I will die on that hill. Like we don't really care what happens unless we care about your perception of how it's taking place, unless we care about you. Okay. And we have to care about you, not because of just a list of events or a list of things that happen. We care about you because of how you decode the situation as it unfolds on the page. So how do you then take all this stuff that I've talked about, things like the point and things like the broader objective realities and your personal subjective realities, and how do you weave that into world building that seduces readers? Because we actually do need to seduce readers. We can't just make them kind of interested. We have to completely captivate them. We have to make it where when they start reading our memoir, they look up an hour later and they're like, dang, I can't believe I've been reading for an hour. So how do we do it? There are 3 secret strategies. Okay, secret number 1. As you're writing, you have to process and interpret events on the page. And this is all about your inner world. It means you must reveal it. Do not write paragraphs that sound like a neutral narrator. Take all of the stuff that we've been brainstorming here, all of the external stuff, the point that you know to be true, and all of the understandings that grow out of your specific identities, and put that on the page as you, the character, is dealing with stuff happening. Okay? You have to put that on the page. Remember, readers come to your memoir to understand why and how you faced a particular set of situations, not just to get a list of stuff that happened. And the only way to give them what they want is to show internal processing of events on the page, which means revealing the internal world. I'm going to show you examples in a minute. Okay, right now I'm going to go on to the next one. Number 2, we have to get super specific with details. It's specificity, not generality, that makes the most absorbing storytelling, okay? The more specific the details, the more your readers will connect to the memoir because it will render the story so vivid and so authentic. It will remind them of their own story. It might be very different than their own story, but they will feel like they're living it. Number 3, you must include lots of backstory. So backstory is often demonized. In fact, many well-meaning writing professionals will caution you to leave out backstory because you don't want to info dump. And I think this warning goes across all genres, don't info dump. However, a memoir without ample backstory is meaningless and thin, and it will not, absolutely will not, have the power to engage readers and agents. So if you want your memoir to resonate with people, if you want it to have the power to change people, then you have to include things like backstory. You have to include lots of interiority. You have to include lots of details. Okay, so I think it's about time that we look at an example. And we are going to be using Educated by Tara Westover, which is one of my favorite memoirs, and it's pretty recent. When we jump into the example, you're going to see a lot of things highlighted in yellow. The yellow highlighting is everything that is backstory, interiority, and specific details. So it's all that stuff that I'm saying really needs to be added to the memoir in order to pull readers in. What isn't highlighted, think of that as the video camera angle. It's just what's happening on the surface, but what's happening underneath, what the protagonist, the writer of the memoir, Tara, is giving us internally through backstory and through specific details. That's where it really gets good. That is where we get all of that juicy stuff that pulls us in. The only context I think you need to understand this scene is to understand that the protagonist is a young girl about 10 years old, and she lives in a very religious family. Her father is a fundamentalist Mormon, and he has recently decided that milk products are made by the government and therefore they're unsafe to consume. So he definitely has some very radical types of beliefs here, and she's been subject to these beliefs for a little while at this point. After Dad took up preaching against milk, Grandma jammed her fridge full of it. She and Grandpa drank only skim milk, but pretty soon it was all there, 2%, whole, even chocolate. She seemed to believe this was an important line to hold. Okay, I'd like to just stop there for a second and have us reflect on that. So notice how all of that is backstory. Beautiful backstory that helps give us context so we understand what's been going on and the grandma's reaction. It helps build the world for us. So we start to get an idea of not only what it's like to be inside this fundamentalist Mormon family, but also what it's like to have a grandmother who is clearly disagreeing with this mentality. And notice how it's all through the lens of her interior world. So it is not dry narration. It's not distant. We are actually inside the protagonist's head, having all of her thoughts and feelings and opinions on it. And at the same time, she's giving great detail. For instance, she's talking about how the grandma only drank skim milk, but pretty soon everything was there, 2% whole, even chocolate. So those are the kinds of details that she could have simply summarized that grandma had a lot of milk, but it's so much more interesting and tells us so much more and paints the picture for us with those very specific details. Okay, let's keep going. Every morning, my family sat around a large table of reworked red oak and ate either 7-grain cereal with honey and molasses or 7-grain pancakes, also with honey or molasses. Because there were 9 of us, the pancakes were never cooked all the way through. I didn't mind the cereal if I could soak it in milk, letting the cream gather up in the grist and seep into the pellets. But since the revelation, we had been having it with water. It was like eating a bowl of mud. Okay, let's go back and dissect that. Again, all backstory. We must have backstory. The current story makes no sense without backstory. And this is kind of a summary of things that have been going on since the last scene. Great stuff. And also notice that it's all interiority, so it's not dry narration. It's not distant. It's definitely in the protagonist's head. It's like she's just talking to us about her life. Also, let's take a look at some of these details. The family sat around a large table of reworked oak. I can picture that. And they were eating not just some cereal, but 7-grain cereal. And of course, the detail of honey and molasses. And then the pancakes were also 7-grain with honey and molasses. So again, these very specific details instead of just saying pancakes and cereal. Also, the detail that the pancakes were never cooked all the way through. That's very much coming from the fact that there were 9 of them, right? So it's giving us that sense of their family, that little detail. And one of my favorite things is at the end, she's giving us that great interiority of once they switched to water, it was just like eating a bowl of mud. So that's very much interiority. It's telling us how she perceived what was happening, how it felt to her, what it was like. Okay, let's keep going. It wasn't long before I began to think of all that milk spoiling in Grandma's fridge. Then I got into the habit of skipping breakfast each morning and going straight to the barn. I'd slop the pigs and fill the troughs for the cows and horses. Then I'd hop over the corral fence, loop around the barn, and step through Grandma's side door. Again, building the world there, giving us specific details about her morning. Okay. On one such morning, as I sat at the counter watching Grandma pour a bowl of cornflakes, she said, "How would you like to go to school?" "I wouldn't like it," I said. "How do you know?" she barked. "You ain't never tried it." She poured the milk and handed me the bowl. Then she perched at the bar directly across from me and watched as I shoveled spoonfuls into my mouth. "We're leaving for tomorrow for Arizona," she told me. But I already knew. She and Grandpa always went to Arizona when the weather began to turn. Grandpa said he was too old for Idaho winters. The cold put an ache in his bones. Again, now in between the dialogue, the author is explaining to us the backstory that the character already knew and why they went to Arizona. So this is backstory information that's being layered in. It's also an example of very well-placed detail about the winters being too cold and it causing an ache in the grandpa's bones. Okay. Get yourself up real early, Grandma said, around 5, and we'll take you with us, put you in school. I shifted on my stool. And now we're going from exterior things like the exterior world. We're coming back inside, which is great world building. You're going to see a lot of interiority, that inner world. I shifted on my stool. Okay, that was external. Now we're going back internal as she imagined some things. I tried to imagine school, but couldn't. Instead, I pictured Sunday school, which I attended each week and which I hated. A boy named Aaron had told all the girls that I couldn't read because I didn't go to school, and now none of them would talk to me. So again, that imagining part, that thinking ahead about an event, that's very much her interiority. It's showing us how she's viewing the world and how she's decoding it and thinking of it. She doesn't really know what school's like, but she's comparing it to Sunday school. And then it gives us some backstory that some boy has been teasing her, and all because she can't read. Okay, now we're going back external again. Dad said I can go, I said. No, Grandma said, but we'll be long gone by the time he realizes you're missing. She set my bowl in the sink and gazed out the window. And now we're going to go back inside the protagonist's head for some backstory about how she perceives the grandmother, and we get to really dive deep into that. Grandma was a force of nature, impatient, aggressive, self-possessed. To look at her was to take a step back. She dyed her hair black, and this intensified her already severe features, especially her eyebrows, which she smeared on each morning in thick, inky arches. She drew them too large, and this made her face seem stretched. They were also drawn too high and draped the rest of her features into an expression of boredom, almost sarcasm. So again, what a great description, great backstory telling us how she's perceiving this grandmother. You should be in school, she said. Won't Dad just make you bring me back? I said. Your dad can't make me do a damn thing, Grandma stood, squaring herself. If he wants you, he'll have to come get you. She hesitated. And now we're going to go back internal because this is the protagonist's perception of what's happening. She's decoding it. And for a moment looked ashamed. So that she's having a theory of the mind about her grandmother. She's thinking her grandmother feels ashamed. Let's jump back in. I talked to him yesterday. He won't be able to fetch you back for a long while. He's behind on that shed he's been building in town. He can't pick up and drive to Arizona, not while the weather holds and he and the boys can work longer days. Grandma's scheme was well plotted. And now we're going back internal, back in with that interiority, that backstory, those details. Dad always worked from sunup until sundown in the weeks before the first snow, trying to stockpile enough money from hauling scrap and building barns to outlast the winter when jobs were scarce. Even if his mother ran off with his youngest child, he wouldn't be able to stop working, not until the forklift was encased in ice. So again, notice how all of this backstory and interiority, all of these details, not only are they enriching the world, but they're actually helping us to understand any of it. Because if we didn't have these yellow bits, if we just suddenly erased them, we would be missing so much. We wouldn't really understand what's happening in the scene because the protagonist wouldn't be telling us the stuff that only she could understand. Okay, let's jump into the next scene. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the kitchen floor and watched the hours tick by. 1 a.m., 2, 3. At 4, I stood and put my boots by the back door. They were caked in manure. And now we're going to go inside her to understand what that means to her, what she thinks that means. And I was sure Grandma wouldn't let them into her car. I pictured them on her porch, abandoned, while I ran off shoeless to Arizona. I imagined what would happen when my father discovered I was missing. And again, all of this is interiority. All of this is her thinking and supposing what's going to happen. My brother Richard and I often spent whole days on the mountain, so we're in backstory right now. So it was likely that no one would notice until sundown when Richard came home for dinner and I didn't. And now we're back in that supposing. I pictured my brothers pushing out the door to search for me. They tried the junkyard first, hefting iron slabs in case some stray sheet of metal had shifted and pinned me. They'd move outward, sweeping the farm, crawling up trees and into the barn attic. Finally, they'd turn to the mountain. It would be past dusk by then, that moment just before night sets in, when the landscape is visible only as darkness and lighter darkness, and you feel the world around you more than you see it. I imagined my brothers spreading over the mountain, searching the black forests. No one would talk. Everyone's thoughts would be the same. Things could go terribly wrong on the mountain. Cliffs appeared suddenly. Feral horses belonging to my grandfather ran wild over the thick banks of the water hemlock, and there were more than a few rattlesnakes. We'd done this search before when a calf went missing from the barn. In the valley, you'd find an injured animal. On the mountain, a dead one. So again, we're in her head like what she thinks is going to happen. So what I'd like you to understand is that none of this has happened. It's all stuff she's just thinking about. So we are deep in her interiority. There is no dry narration here. There is no neutral observer. We are absolutely 100% in the protagonist's head. This is her interiority, thinking about the future, thinking about the past, giving very specific details, even details from her imagination about how things would play out. I imagined my mother standing by the back door, her eyes sweeping the dark ridge when my father came home to tell her they hadn't found me. My sister Audrey would suggest that someone ask Grandma, and Mother would say Grandma had left that morning for Arizona. Those words would hang in the air for a moment, then everyone would know where I'd gone. I imagined my father's face, his dark eyes shrinking, his mouth clamping into a frown as he turned to my mother. "You think she chose to go?" Low and sorrowful, his voice echoed. Then it was drowned out by sounds from another conjured remembrance. Crickets, then gunfire, then silence. Okay, wow. So much good stuff. And I hope you can see how the protagonist's inner world, shaped by her identity, shaped by the point that the novel is trying to make, shaped by the external world, the objective world, and the internal subjective world, is all coming together here to create a very beautiful narrative that is very hard to put down. I know I could not put it down when I was reading it. All right, my friends, so we are getting very close to the end of this presentation, and now I have some homework for you because I'm a recovering teacher. I was a teacher for 14 years as a high school teacher and a few more as a college professor, so of course I'm going to give you some homework, mainly because there's something I want you to do that you can't really do in just 2 or 3 minutes that I could give you here in the presentation. All right, so this exercise is called Deepen Your First Scene. There are a few steps to this. So the first step is you will copy and paste your first scene into a new document. Okay. And the reason why you're going to do this is because if you copy and paste it into a new document, you won't feel scared to alter it. Okay. It's kind of fresh. You can play with it and it's not going to mess up all the work that you did in your original document. Step 2. Take 5 minutes to jot down any specific details that you remember about the moment that the scene is trying to capture. And so these details don't have to currently be in the scene. In fact, it's probably better if they're not already in the scene. So if you see things that are already in the scene, you don't have to rewrite those. But just jot down any descriptions of physical objects, maybe the room, maybe another person. What sights do you see? What sounds, what smells, what physical sensations are there? So basically what you're doing here is you're trying to think about what are all the specifics, all the beautiful details that you might not have captured the first time. Step 3, you're going to take about 2 minutes to reflect on the backstory and context associated with the moment. So this is where you're going to start fleshing things out. You remember in that example where so much of what I highlighted was actually backstory. You're going to start trying to build some of that you can then implant into your story. Okay, so here are some questions you can ask yourself. What backstory were you reflecting on during the scene that really helped you to decode the situation or understand the situation or decide what to do? And number 2, what broad or granular backstory would help readers understand the scene better? Meaning, what do you have to implant in there to just make sure that your very personal world is brought to life on the page? Remember, do not be afraid of backstory. Backstory is your best friend. You must have it in order for anyone to understand and really connect to your memoir. Step 4, take 2 minutes to capture your inner world. We're going for all that good interiority. And these are some questions that you can ask yourself to maybe help bring that interiority to the surface. And there might be more and better questions that you can also think to ask yourself that I might not have written here. But here are the ones that I wrote. They might help you get things started. What was I thinking and feeling in that moment? What was I hoping for or afraid of? What didn't I understand but wanted to? What story was I telling myself about what was happening? And what did I want to say but couldn't? Step 5, you're going to take 2 minutes to look at your identities exercise. Do you remember you did that earlier? You were looking at all the identities that you hold. Okay, do any of your identities influence what's happening in the scene, in the moment, that first scene in your memoir? If so, how? Because that's going to be going into the interiority, like how the identities that you have are influencing how you're thinking and feeling. And finally, here's the big one, step 6. You are going to make your scene richer through world building. So I would love for you to take about 30 minutes to just edit the first scene to incorporate the work that you did in steps 1 through 5. Okay? Remember that it is okay to play around and try things. You might be surprised at how much deeper and richer your first scene becomes. And here's a tip. Dry narration is a bore. We don't want a neutral observer. So even when you're adding objective realities and when you're adding backstory, make sure to do it in a way that is using your own voice, your own personal voice, so that it feels authentic and compelling. All right, my friends, I really hope that when you get a chance to do this exercise after you've watched a few more of the presentations today, it will really, really be helpful to you. If you have any questions or get stuck, you can always send me an email. My email address is heather@manyworldswriting.com. And if, of course, now that we're at the end of this presentation, you start to think, oh, I might want to work with Heather, please go ahead and schedule a free book coaching session with me now. I would love to talk to you about your memoir and how I might be able to help you. Thanks for watching. Honestly, time is our most valuable resource, so I thank you so much for sharing yours with me today, and I hope this workshop was helpful to you. Have a wonderful rest of your summit. Bye-bye.